"You're not invited to Mom's birthday party. We already have too many important people coming," my sister Vanessa announced over the phone, her voice dripping with that familiar condescension that had followed me my entire life, and I could hear laughter in the background as she added, "Besides, nobody wants to hear about your little coding job again. It's embarrassing when Dad's business partners ask what his daughters do, and we have to mention you're just some programmer." I gripped my phone tighter, feeling that familiar sting in my chest as I stood in my corner office overlooking downtown, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early evening, and for a moment, I considered telling her the truth right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was the years of conditioning, or maybe I just wanted to see how far they'd take this cruelty. So instead, I just said quietly, "I understand, Vanessa. I hope Mom has a wonderful party," and hung up before she could deliver another blow. My name is Natalie. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 8 years, I've built something my family never bothered to understand or respect. Because to them, I was always just the weird middle child who preferred computers to country clubs, who got a scholarship to MIT instead of marrying into Dad's business circle, who moved to the city instead of staying in their perfectly manicured suburban bubble, and while Vanessa became the trophy wife they always wanted her to be, and my younger brother Connor joined Dad's commercial real estate firm, I became the family disappointment, the one they mentioned last at gatherings, if at all, the one whose career was reduced to, "She does something with computers," followed by eye rolls and quick subject changes. The irony was suffocating because every month I sent money home to help with Mom's medical bills, telling them it was from freelance work since they'd never believed the truth about my actual income. And every family dinner I attended ended with Dad's speech about how I should have gotten an MBA like Connor, how I was wasting my potential playing with computers, how at my age I should be married with kids instead of playing startup games, never knowing that my little coding job had grown into something that would make his real estate portfolio look like pocket change. But I'd learned long ago that telling them would only invite more criticism, more dismissal, more accusations that I was lying or exaggerating, so I kept quiet and let them believe their version of me. The pattern started long before I understood what it was. Back when I was 12 and Dad brought home matching tennis bracelets for Vanessa and Mom after closing a major deal, telling me I wouldn't understand the value of such things when I asked where mine was, or when I was 16 and they threw Vanessa a massive sweet 16 party with 200 guests, while mine was a quiet dinner at home because you don't really like parties anyway, right, Natalie? Even though I'd begged for months, or when I graduated summa cum laude from MIT, and they couldn't make it because Connor had a lacrosse game that same weekend, sending me a card that arrived 3 weeks late with a generic, "Congratulations on your graduation" message. Every achievement of mine was minimized while every mediocrity of theirs was celebrated. Like when Vanessa married Bradley, a trust fund baby whose greatest accomplishment was not getting expelled from 3 different colleges, and they threw a $300,000 wedding calling it the social event of the year. Or when Connor barely passed his real estate exam on the 4th try, and Dad threw a party at the country club announcing his son was following in his footsteps, while my Series A funding of $15 million was met with Dad asking if I was sure it wasn't some kind of scam, because nobody just gives you that kind of money for playing on computers. Mom was the subtlest but perhaps the cruelest, always introducing me last at gatherings with, "And this is Natalie. She does something with computers," her voice trailing off like she was embarrassed, then quickly pivoting to gush about Vanessa's charity luncheons or Connor's latest golf handicap, and whenever I tried to explain my work, she'd pat my hand and say, "That's nice, dear," before changing the subject to ask when I was going to settle down and give her grandchildren like Vanessa had. Never mind that Vanessa's kids were raised entirely by nannies while she spent her days at the spa. The exclusions were constant and creative, from family vacations I'd learn about through Instagram posts captioned, "Whole family together at last," to business dinners where Dad would introduce Connor to his associates as the future of the family business, while I wasn't even invited, claiming it would be boring business talk that wouldn't interest me. And through it all, I kept sending money home, paying for Mom's treatments, covering emergency expenses, being their safety net while being treated like an unwelcome obligation at every family gathering, telling myself that one day they'd see me for who I really was, not knowing that day would come in the most unexpected way possible.
The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing acquisition offers for my company, and Mom's voice was unusually cheerful as she said, "Natalie, dear, I wanted to let you know about my birthday party next month. We're having it at the country club. Vanessa's organizing everything." And for a moment, my heart lifted, because she was actually calling to invite me personally. until she continued, "But here's the thing. Bradley's new business partner is coming, you know, from that European investment firm, and we need to make a good impression, so we're keeping it to immediate family and important business connections only." And I felt that familiar twist in my stomach as I asked, "But I am immediate family, Mom." And she sighed like I was being difficult. "You know what I mean, Natalie. People who understand these social situations. And honestly, every time you come to these things, you just talk about your computer work and make everyone uncomfortable. Maybe next year when things are less important." I was still processing the hurt when I heard Vanessa's voice in the background saying loudly enough to be heard, "Just tell her already, Mom. We don't want her there because she's embarrassing, walking around in her thrift store clothes, acting superior because she went to some nerdy school." And Mom didn't defend me, just made a small tutting sound before saying, "Vanessa's just stressed with the planning. You understand, don't you?" And that's when something inside me finally shattered. 32 years of being the family ATM while being treated like a shameful secret. And I heard myself saying very calmly, "I understand perfectly, Mom. Have a wonderful party," before hanging up. The irony was excruciating because just 2 hours earlier, I'd wired $50,000 to cover what Mom had called an urgent medical expense that insurance wouldn't cover. The latest in a long line of financial rescues I'd performed while being told I didn't belong at family gatherings. And as I sat there, staring at the acquisition offers on my desk, offers that would make me wealthier than my father's entire real estate portfolio, I realized they didn't even know the name of my company, had never asked about Technova, despite it being featured in Forbes just last month, had no idea that the computer work they mocked had built something that Amazon, Google, and Microsoft were all bidding to acquire. The breaking point wasn't just being excluded from the party. It was Vanessa's casual cruelty and Mom's complicit silence, the way they'd reduced my entire existence to an embarrassment, while simultaneously cashing my checks. And as I pulled up my banking app to see the years of transfers, totaling well over $400,000 in family support, I felt a strange calm settle over me, because I finally understood that they didn't see me as family at all, just as a resource to be exploited while being kept at arm's length. And for the first time in my life, I decided that if they wanted me out of their lives so badly, I would give them exactly what they wished for, but on my terms, in my way, with a lesson they'd never forget about the true value of family, and who had really been supporting whom all these years. The next 3 weeks became my masterclass in strategic patience as I continued playing the role of the invisible daughter while orchestrating something much bigger, starting with declining the acquisition offers temporarily, telling my board I needed another month to consider, which they found puzzling since the Google offer alone was $2.3 billion. But I had my reasons, and every morning I went to work as Technova's CEO, while my family had no idea they'd been mocking someone who employed over 800 people and had just been named to Time's Next Generation Leaders list. I hired a private investigator, not to dig up dirt, but to document everything properly. And what she found was illuminating. Vanessa's husband, Bradley, was drowning in debt from failed investments. Their lifestyle maintained entirely by credit, while they waited for what they assumed would be Mom's eventual inheritance. Connor's real estate ventures were bleeding money, with Dad secretly covering his losses to maintain appearances. And most interesting of all, Bradley's supposed European business partner was Narcus Webb, someone I knew very well from the tech world, though in a very different context than they imagined. The documentation process was methodical as I gathered every bank transfer, every text message where they'd asked for money, every email where they'd excluded me from family events while simultaneously requesting financial help, creating a comprehensive file that showed the truth of our family dynamic. And I also did something else. I started quietly transferring my shares in Technova to a trust, restructuring everything so that when the time came for revelations, everything would be legally ironclad and protected from any attempts at manipulation. My assistant, Emma, who'd been with me for 5 years, noticed my unusual behavior when I asked her to compile a complete record of every major media mention of Technova and every industry award we'd won, and she asked carefully, planning something big, to which I simply smiled and said, just organizing some overdue introductions, and she knew me well enough not to press further, though she did make sure to include the Harvard Business Review article that called me the most influential unknown CEO in tech. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy when Mom called asking for another $30,000 for unexpected household expenses. Her voice sweet and maternal only when she needed money, and I transferred it without complaint, adding the transaction to my growing file, knowing this would be the last time. And when Vanessa posted Instagram photos of her party planning with captions like, curating the perfect guest list for Mom's special day, each post tagged with luxury brands and exclusive venues, I screenshot everything, noting how my money was funding their fantasy, while I remained persona non grata. But what they didn't know was that I'd already RSVP'd to the party through someone else entirely, someone whose presence they'd specifically requested. And the beautiful irony of it all made the daily humiliations bearable because soon, very soon, they would understand exactly who they'd been so eager to exclude from their precious social circle. Marcus Webb and I had history that my family could never have imagined, having met 5 years ago at a tech summit in Singapore where we'd both been speakers, and over late-night discussions about quantum computing and market disruption, we'd become close friends and occasional business partners. So when I called him after discovering he was Bradley's mysterious European investor, he laughed for a full minute before saying, "Your brother-in-law pitched me the worst investment proposal I've seen in 20 years, all flash and no substance. But now I understand why you wanted to meet about this, and that's how our plan began to take shape." "I'll play along," Marcus said during our video call, his British accent making everything sound more sophisticated than it was. "But Natalie, are you sure you want to do this? Once your family knows who you really are, there's no going back." And I told him I'd already passed the point of no return, that years of being their secret ATM while being treated like a shameful footnote had finally reached critical mass. And he understood because he built his own empire after his family dismissed his potential, making him the perfect ally for what was about to unfold. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would attend the birthday party as Bradley's potential investor, the honored guest they were all desperate to impress, and at the right moment, he would naturally bring up Technova, the company he'd been trying to partner with for years, led by someone he considered one of the most brilliant minds in tech. And the beauty was that it would all be true, every word, because Marcus had actually been pursuing a partnership with my company long before this family drama presented the perfect opportunity for revelation. Meanwhile, I prepared my own appearance carefully, not as Natalie, the embarrassing sister, but as N.M. Hayes, the name I used professionally, having adopted my grandmother's maiden name to honor the woman who'd believed in me when no one else did. And I had Emma arrange for a complete transformation, designer clothes that fit properly instead of my usual hoodies, professional styling that would make me unrecognizable to a family that had never really looked at me anyway. And most importantly, the confidence that came from knowing I was about to stop hiding who I'd become. 3 days before the party, I executed the final phase by cutting off all financial support without warning or explanation, knowing they'd panic but counting on their pride to prevent them from reaching out until after the party. And sure enough, the family group chat I wasn't part of, but could see through Connor's girlfriend's phone. She'd asked for tech help once, and I'd noticed she screenshot everything. Exploded with confusion about why certain automatic payments hadn't processed, why the premium insurance policies showed non-payment warnings, why the lawn service had called about overdue invoices, but they assured each other it was just a banking glitch that could be sorted after Mom's celebration. A night before the party, as I stood in my penthouse looking out at the city lights, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "All confirmed. They've given me the seat of honor next to your mother, and Bradley's been practicing his pitch all week. This should be rather entertaining." And I smiled, knowing that tomorrow, at exactly the right moment, my family would finally meet the real me, the daughter they'd pushed away, the sister they'd mocked, the woman who'd built an empire while they'd built nothing but expectations. The country club looked exactly as it always did for family celebrations, all white orchids and crystal chandeliers, the same faces, wearing the same practiced smiles. And I arrived precisely 30 minutes after the party started. My transformation complete in a sleek black dress and subtle diamonds, my hair professionally styled instead of in its usual ponytail, walking with the confidence of someone who just turned down billion-dollar offers. And the first person I encountered was Connor's wife, Patricia, who looked right through me as she handed her coat to the attendant, having no idea she just ignored her sister-in-law. I found a strategic position near the terrace where I could observe without being noticed, watching my family in their element. Dad holding court with his business associates, bragging about Connor's latest development project that I knew was hemorrhaging money. Mom graciously accepting birthday wishes while Vanessa fluttered around her like an attentive butterfly, ensuring everyone saw her designer dress and new jewelry. And there was Bradley, practically vibrating with nervous energy as he hovered near Marcus, who was playing his role perfectly as the sophisticated European investor they were all desperate to impress.
The moment began to unfold when Marcus raised his champagne glass during a lull in conversation and said in his perfectly cultured voice, "I must say, Bradley, when you reached out about investment opportunities, I was skeptical, but being here in your charming city has reminded me why I've been trying to establish a partnership with one of your local companies. Perhaps you've heard of Technova." And I watched the recognition flicker across Dad's face, the company name he'd dismissed so many times suddenly carrying weight when spoken by someone he considered important. "Technova, of course," Dad jumped in, eager to show his business acumen. "Remarkable company. I've been following their trajectory," which was a complete lie, but Marcus smiled encouragingly and continued. "Yes, their CEO is quite extraordinary, N.M. Hayes. Started the company 8 years ago and built it into something Google is desperate to acquire. Absolutely brilliant mind. I've been trying to convince her to partner with my firm for years." And that's when Vanessa, always needing to be the center of attention, laughed and said, "Hayes? Sounds Chinese. Probably one of those foreign tech people buying up everything." And the casual racism made my decision even easier. "Actually," Marcus said smoothly, "N.M. Hayes is as American as you are, born and raised right here, though I understand she uses her grandmother's maiden name professionally, quite common in tech to maintain privacy." And then he turned directly to me, having spotted me the moment I'd arrived, and said with a smile that didn't quite hide his amusement, "In fact, I believe she's here tonight, Natalie. Would you mind joining us? I've been telling your family about your remarkable success." The silence that followed was absolute, everyone turning to stare at me as I walked over, no longer the invisible daughter in ill-fitting clothes, but someone who commanded attention, and I saw the exact moment recognition hit them. Mom's champagne glass trembling slightly, Dad's face cycling through confusion to disbelief, Vanessa's mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, and Bradley looking between Marcus and me with growing horror as he realized his potential investor was here for me, not him. And I smiled pleasantly, extending my hand to Marcus as I said in my CEO voice, "Marcus, lovely to see you again. I see you've met my family, though I should clarify. I go by N.M. Hayes professionally. Natalie is just for family. Well, when I'm actually included in family events, that is." 6 months later, I sat in my new office in the Technova headquarters, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, reviewing the final papers for our merger with Marcus's firm, a partnership that would value the company at $3.8 billion. And as I signed my name, not as Natalie but as N.M. Hayes, I thought about how much had changed since that night at the country club, when my family finally saw me for who I really was, not their ATM or their embarrassment, but someone who had built an empire while they'd built nothing but walls.
The aftermath had been predictable. Dad calling the next day suddenly interested in my business, offering to help manage my finances. Mom leaving tearful voicemails about how proud she'd always been. Vanessa trying to friend me on LinkedIn with a message about supporting women in tech, and Connor asking if Technova needed any real estate consultation. But I responded to none of them, having already mourned the family I'd never really had, and instead focused on the family I'd chosen, my team, my mentors, and the grandmother whose name I carried with pride. Bradley's investment deal with Marcus had evaporated that very night, and without my financial support, the family discovered how precarious their situation truly was. Though I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only a quiet peace in knowing I was no longer enabling their delusions. And when Emma told me she'd heard through the grapevine that they'd had to sell the country club membership, and Vanessa had gotten the job for the first time in her life, I simply nodded and returned to reviewing code, because their journey was no longer my concern. You know, Marcus said during our celebration dinner, they still don't really understand what they lost. And I smiled, raising my glass of champagne, the good kind now, and replied, "That's the thing about only seeing someone's surface, Marcus. You miss the entire ocean underneath." And as the sun set over the bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility, I knew I hadn't just built a company. I built a life where my worth wasn't determined by others' blindness. And that was worth more than all the birthday invitations in the world.